Please excuse me, I'm a little nervous. My name is M. I am a PhD student in electrical engineering and am about 2 months away from completing my thesis, as I have been for the last 4 years. I came to the university with a great deal of excitement 6 years ago, even turning down an offer from MIT. My area of research is in the field of affective computing. I study computational mechanisms to automatically detect and interpret human emotion using various sensing devices, such as cameras and physiological sensors. My GPA is 3.98. I have received just about every student award offered, and since being here, I have published 17 papers in a wide range of disciplines, such as music cognition, human-computer interaction, neuroscience, machine learning, signal processing, and robotics. Notably, I have published in Nature Neuroscience and the PLOS, and am well regarded in the field of affective computing. As part of my research in affective computing, I developed a camera-based system that recognizes emotion through facial expression in real time, achieving the highest accuracy published in the literature. This was inspired by a friend's young son with Asperger's syndrome, who seemed comfortable responding only to SpongeBob. What might happen if he found he could make SpongeBob laugh? Also, during my time here, I have traveled as a research scholar to Honda Research Institute in California. I am responsible for giving Honda's Asima robot emotional recognition and intelligence. My interest in emotion began when my research advisor, Professor K, assigned me to work with a theater director from outside the university. The director was proposing a development of an emotional imaging composer. This sensor tracks biosignals, galvanic skin response, electrocardiogram, blood volume pulse, and phalange temperature. Some signals, such as heartbeat, can be expressive on their own terms. For the emotional imaging composer, I developed algorithms that use these signals to interpret emotion in real time with 98% accuracy. This graph is monitoring how I am feeling as I speak to you. See how it changes dynamically as I speak. The theater director was interested in using this technology to develop an expressive instrument, one that could translate these signals into responsive environments in real time. A multimedia instrument that you could learn to play with your emotions. What you are seeing around me is being generated by how I am feeling at this moment. I am emotionally transparent to you right now. My agitation is apparent. For people who haven't learned to play it, the emotional imaging composer is in fact nothing more than a highly enriched multimedia lie detector. But because it is so responsive to the slightest nuance of feeling, You can learn to play it using emotional intent, acquiring mastery in the same way as you would any musical instrument. As you can see, I haven't learned to play it myself. I wish I could show you what joy looks like, but I'm afraid it's not something that I felt for quite some time. Following up on our experience with SpongeBob, we met with Dr. B from the university's Department of Counseling and Psychology. We hope to explore uses of both emotional imaging and facial expression in special needs schools that cater to children with autism. These systems offer an unprecedented way to teach children with autism both to recognize emotions in others and in learning to do so to emotionally express themselves. This is why I chose to become an engineer. I want to help people. And it seems to me that one of the most pressing needs we have in our culture today is to open up new means of communicating how we feel, as well how we make others feel. I believe that empathy is what makes us human. Our work on emotional imaging went extremely well, and we published our paper, Biosignals and Their Application in the Performance Settings, which we presented at the International Biosignals Conference. We also presented a proof of concept theatrical performance called Si Sensible, So Sensitive. Some months later, Professor K asked me to modify my facial expression recognition software to develop a facial recognition system. The project, which ultimately won the university the contract with the Department of National Defense, was to develop a login system where your face was your password. He encouraged me to work on this project both for the very interesting questions it posed regarding pattern recognition and for the opportunity to work closely with Professor C, a pioneer in the field of computer vision. Some months into the contract, however, personnel from the D&D began discussing possible military applications for this software. Specifically, they wanted to test it on NATO patrol ships to determine if it could discriminate between fishermen and non-pirates in the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. When Professor K first outlined the project, I knew that if made aware of it, some in the military would think of using this software to target people. They wanted to use something I made to kill people. This was the moment I had feared. I tried to withdraw from the project, but Professor K insisted I was contractually obligated, that the university would not tolerate being compromised in this way, and that he would end the stipend that was supporting me in my studies. Since coming to the lab, I had been watching Professor K use fear and intimidation to take advantage of power relationship between himself and his students, many of whom, like me, are from other countries and are particularly vulnerable. His anger can be overwhelming. Now his sights were trained on me. Each day I would go back to the lab in dread. This went for months. I stopped being able to sleep at night. For the first time in my life, I became seriously concerned for my mental health. Before all this, I couldn't even imagine what this would be like. I couldn't talk to anybody about what was going on because I was under gag orders from all the non-disclosure agreements I had been made to sign. The only official I could confide in was the psychiatrist from the university's mental health clinic, who seemed unable to offer me anything other than a series of anti-anxiety medications, just so I could function and get through this nightmare. Not knowing what else to do, I decided that for the sake of my emotional well-being and because I verbally agreed to work on this project, I would fulfill my obligations and then return to my doctoral research in affective computing. For the time being, I was made to put my own research aside and to focus entirely on the facial recognition project. About 6 months later, we were asked up to the Royal Bank Suites at Place Ville-Marie to showcase the software to a group of top Canadian and American military contractors. During this event, Professors K and C and I were asked by various high-level executives such questions as: could this system be used in a citywide surveillance system such as London's to track and monitor people in real time? Can this system be trained to detect and highlight Muslims in the crowd, people with Middle Eastern skin complexion, people with Islamic type beards, with Middle Eastern headwear? Could this system be used on onboard cameras of drones and attack helicopters in a desert environment? The day after this event, I sent a letter to Professor K that I stayed up all night writing, stating that on moral grounds I would not participate in this project after the completion of the contract with the D&D. I said that I was aware that racial profiling was illegal and opposed any collaboration that could implicate me in an illegal activity. He assured me when we met a couple of days later that I could stop working on this project once the contract with the D&D was completed, and that he would assign someone else to finish the work. It did not work out that way. 2 weeks later, Professor K, unable to find someone with the required skill set, came to me and insisted that I continue working on this project. He said that to keep myself and my fellow students funded, the lab needed the lucrative defense and security contracts that this IP was likely to bring in. Having helped write several successful grant applications with Professor K, I knew that the lab was very well funded, the fact of which he often boasted. Professor K is a volatile and a bizarrely vindictive man. It is a point of a great pride with him that he actually sues a half-dozen people and organizations a year, such as the STM, FedEx, taxi drivers, movers, waiters, even the Faculty of Engineering. During lab meetings, he often talks about who he's suing that month. I knew that saying no to him again would not only expose me to his intimidating anger, but that it would be perfectly in character for him to find some reason to sue me, which of course would also spell the end of my doctoral work, ruin my reputation, jeopardize my professional career, and sever my only source of income. I felt trapped. I was being forced to choose between my moral convictions and my future. It is hard to describe my mental state at that time. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep because of the constant nightmares. I was having panic attacks day and night. I was seeing the psychiatrist twice a week, as I still do, other than medications. All she could do was to mirror back to me her own amazement and powerlessness at what was unfolding. One difficult night, I snapped awake from my drugged sleep, soaked with sweat, with my heart pounding in my ears, with the answer suddenly there. It was so simple because I realized I simply didn't have a choice. There was no way I could let my software to be used for any kind of killing. I wouldn't be able to live with myself. With this certainty, a feeling of a relief washed over me. What else could I do? I thought that the best way to end all this would be to create a version of the software that would lower the robustness of the classification. This is what I would use in all future demonstrations to the private defense companies. It was my hope that this would cause them to lose interest and that the project would be abandoned. Naive as it may seem, I thought that this approach would ultimately avert a lot of trouble. The illegality of the proposed applications could open all of us up to criminal charges. The university, Professors K and C, and myself. Meanwhile, I had to attend several meetings with Professors K and C, in which the discussion was on what to include in the IP journal of the contract. This journal outlines the background intellectual property which belongs to the university and the foreground intellectual property which belongs to the D&D and the Crown. During these meetings, the IP journal was progressively falsified to include the most valuable components in the background IP as belonging to the university. The software in the university's possession thus actually belongs to the Crown. Professors K and C were committing theft and fraud to which I was an unwilling witness. Shortly thereafter, I delivered the unadulterated version of the software to the Department of National Defense. I demonstrated it and instructed their personnel on its operation. Their scientists were very grateful for the personal tutoring and support, and notified the university's OTT that the contract was satisfactorily completed. Much relieved to have the contract out of the way, I returned to the lab, expecting to continue work on my doctoral research on effective computing. Instead, Professor K insisted that I continue working on creating the commercializable version of the software for demonstration purposes. I was not permitted time to pursue any scientific work for my PhD, which by now had been stalled for well over a year. So, despite my moral objections, both to the application for which I knew the software was being prepared and the fact that this was a stolen property they were planning to sell, I was forced to continue. Along with everything else, he was threatening to cut my only source of income, the grant awarded for my effective computing research. My anxiety started affecting my physical health in alarming new ways. During this time, at least 1,000 representatives of a top American and Canadian military contractors came to the lab for demonstrations. I used the inferior version for each of these demos, producing mediocre results as expected. Still, the results were moderately better than other facial recognition software they had seen. And Family Software, a Montreal-based security and surveillance company, with its Israeli investors, were still interested in acquiring the IP very quickly. They had drafted an industrial partnership contract between the university and themselves and were anxious for us to sign on. Under its terms, my personal revenue share as a lead inventor would be the highest on the university's team, about 6.8 million. That afternoon, after the demo and the intense pressure to which I had been subjected, my anxiety became overwhelming. Despite my best efforts of dissuasion, a defense company with its industry backers were pushing to aggressively license the technology that I had developed for the purpose of targeted killing. I felt trapped with no place to turn. I decided to give up the fight. That day, I told Professor K that I was resigning from the lab. He alternated between threatening me and trying to entice me with the money. But I told him that I had no intention of profiting with this money and that I wanted my share to be directly distributed to various NGOs and charitable organizations. He became furious at this idea, saying that he might look bad if word of it got out. I sent my letter of resignation to Professor K the following day. Shortly thereafter, I was fortunate to find a new and sympathetic supervisor, Associate Professor S., who took me into his lab and allowed me to finally continue work on my doctorate. Less than a month later, however, the Office of Technology Transfer informed me by email that Professors K and C were continuing to pursue this project for commercialization. This was followed by Professor K initiating a research misconduct complaint against me, as he was unable to reach the same level of accuracy as had been delivered to the D&D. I was to be put on trial. I was not to be permitted any legal counsel prior to the hearing or representation during the hearing. I was referred instead to the University Student Advocacy Office, where I was met with near incomprehensible indifference and incompetence. Unfortunately for me, the students working there wanted nothing more than an extra line on their resumes. During the preparation for the trial, the only official I was permitted to meet was the Research Integrity Officer, Dr. F, who was overseeing the whole process and coordinating my appearance before the committee. Each time I met alone with him in his office, however, I was shocked at the hostility, subjectivity, and carelessness that he subjected regarding my rights and my emotional state at that time. It came to a point where I had to begin each meeting by telling him that if his treatment of me continued in this way, I wouldn't stay. I wish those meetings had been recorded. I came to the trial alone, but prepared to defend my actions on 3 fronts. First, I was being forced into abandoning my own work, my reason for being at the university, to develop this technology in which I had little interest. Professors K and C decided that my unusual combination of skills was theirs to exploit. Secondly, the blatant disregard of my moral and ethical convictions is a clear violation of my human rights. This is especially true in a situation such as this, in which the intended uses of this technology involved racial targeting, which is illegal. And third, I was forced to participate in the intellectual property fraud committed by Professors K and C. In support, I presented a large amount of physical evidence in form of emails, meeting minutes, technology reports, project journals, contracts, and names of witnesses, since I was not allowed to bring witnesses to testify in my defense. I explained that although my actions had been questionable, they were not for the purpose of bringing me any kind of reward. In fact, the contrary was true. My actions meant giving up a lot of money. I also believe that my actions saved everyone involved from criminal charges, including the university, for the reasons it well remembers. All of this seemed to leave little impression. I was sanctioned to research probation for the remainder of my doctoral research for having sabotaged the live demonstrations to the private defense companies. Nobody else involved received any mention of wrongdoing. In retrospect, I regret my decision to sabotage the live demonstrations and the lack of judgment it reflected. I am disappointed in myself for being thrown so off-center. Why I didn't think of going to the police in the first place? I can only attribute to the extreme duress I was under and how helpless and isolated I was feeling. I found myself in a situation where I had to choose between the lesser of two evils. And I put everything on the line for what I believed was the right thing to do. I was sure that this whole experience at the justice at the university must have been an anomaly. especially in the academic caliber of those who had reprimanded me. I felt I had to win back my good name. And so shortly thereafter, I began my quest to hold Professors K and C accountable for their actions, both with respect to their actions and to their treatment of me and to the fraud they committed. I submitted every piece of evidence along with the detailed accounts of what had happened to everybody in a position of power. I filed complaints with the Research Integrity Office, personally met with the Associate Deans in the Faculty of Engineering and Graduate Studies, with the university's ombudsperson, with the university's chief legal officer, and the associate provost. Everybody I spoke to appeared sympathetic and most promised to look into it. But nothing ever happened. Despite my best efforts, the whole issue just seemed to die. I realized I was completely alone in this. Deeply discouraged, I eventually pleaded my way to a face-to-face meeting with the provost. During this meeting, the provost refused to comment or advise me on the issues I brought up with him. Despite explaining to him that the IP was stolen and that its intended uses were unethical and possibly illegal, he even affirmed that racial profiling is illegal. He told me to transfer the unadulterated version to Professor K within 1 hour of our meeting, or I would be expelled on the spot. I was stunned. He wouldn't say anything else. Just stay there, stone-faced. I realized he expected me to leave. Not knowing what else to do, I stood up and made my way to the door. Just as I was about to leave, I turned back and managed to ask the provost if I had legal rights to the public disclosure of the events leading up to this. He said to me that if I spoke to the media, I would be expelled. I was shocked into silence and quickly left. I immediately transferred the software to Professor K, accepted the probation sanctions, and decided to complete my doctorate as soon as possible in my new lab. I had to try to put all of this behind me. I was deeply shaken by how easily my life had been hijacked, by the cavalier violation of my human rights and the university's own code of conduct. I don't know if you can imagine what this ordeal had been like to me, but I'm still recovering and being treated for PTSD. This has been an excruciating time for me. Not only I am forced to live with the indignity of having been found guilty for something of which I am innocent, but I have been waiting for this final appearance before you here for 3.5 months past mandated deadline. This has proved to be typical of the university's heavy-handed treatment of me in all phases of the 2 disciplinary procedures I had been forced to endure. Up until now, I have asked for no concessions with regard to the university's judicial system. However, it is not right that I have never had anyone to look after my interests, or for that matter, even been allowed to call someone in as a character witness. Nor have I even had the right to normal access to the accounts of proceedings or reports. Given my experience with the university's judicial system to date, it is hard for me to trust that my appearance before this final committee will serve any purpose other than to rubber stamp a deeply flawed process that has violated my rights and has been used to destroy my academic career. But my question is, why? How did I get here? How is it possible that I could be so abruptly be pulled from my peaceful and successful PhD research to be forced to create something that was used to be used for targeted killing? And how could I expect that when I refused, I would find myself under attack from all sides? Is there a connection between my refusal to cooperate with selling the facial recognition software and the charges brought against me by Professor E? Or is it just by chance that this desperate attempt to shift attention from some misdeed of his own has suddenly popped up now? Must graduate students now assume that going to the university means becoming a pawn both in the machinations of professors and the financial priorities of the university? And is this how we are to be treated if we refuse? But my question may not be your question. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes to empathize. Do I decide this man's fate based on what is clearly right or on what is expected of me? Should I be just or expedient? And I know that this decision is more difficult for some of you than for others. How do I know? You will recall that at the beginning of my defense, I showed you a video of SpongeBob whose face was being animated by my facial expression. Here's what he looks like when I track you. I can tell you how each one of you is feeling as I speak. Or I can tell you the average sentiment among you. I have been assessing your level of empathy since we began, and I already know what the outcome of this trial will be. But let me leave you with this, lest you think there will be no consequences to your actions today. You are now aware that you are as transparent to me as I am to you. by acquiescing to the administration's obvious determination to expel me from the university and get back to business. You are not only countenancing, but enabling the militarization of some very powerful software, which will most certainly be keeping its eye on you.